So this is the budget option for a Wukong replacement if you didn't want to roll him, or if you're watching this in the future and just don't have the ability to, since he doesn't have a story summon. Even if he did have a story summon, Rift is going to be gone by the time that opens anyways. Armin's a 4-star, not guaranteed to get obviously, but by the time you hit rank 70, you're probably going to have an Armin. There's other replacements that are probably better. Mortalix is probably better, though he also doesn't really have that many uses, so unless you're going to grace him, there's not too much of a reason to build him. Alencia, also pretty outdated at this point, but also a better frontliner than Armin for this Rift. There's also Albedo, who struggles from pretty much the same issues that Armin ends up struggling with. Albedo does have a Death Break on her S3, so she would increase the consistency of your runs, since you would have 2 chances, both Bellona and Albedo, to land Death Break at the start of the fight. But the issue is that Albedo's S2 only procs when an ally gets crit. S2, the boss's S2, can't be countered. S1 is single target, so it's only hitting Albedo, and S3 can't crit. So Albedo just cannot proc her S2, and she won't be able to proc her AoE and help you remove tentacles or anything. Aside from that, Bellona is also a gacha unit, but she does have a story summon that's activatable whenever you want. And she's a bit more useful than Wukong so far, since she has her uses in Banshee 13 one-shot and Nightmare Jewleaf. First, let's take a look at their stats. For Armin, ideally you want to be on counter set, since that combines with her S2 passive and she'll be able to proc her S1 AoE to help you remove Sever Stacks and do a bit of damage. This Armin is not doing damage. I have like no crit substats because this account does not have much gear, let alone counter gear. The right sides, you probably want them to all be def percent in my opinion, because she's a def scaling unit, but also since a lot of our healing is coming from Bloodstone, you want there to be less HP to heal. For her EE, it doesn't really matter. I took the first one that I rolled. I don't even think she needs the speed, honestly, but I rolled one anyways, and this is probably her best EE either way. For Artifact, I think Arius is good, because since we don't have Wukong who can heal himself or use a healing device, we're stuck having a lot of the healing be funneled into Armin since she's taking so much damage. So Arius would help your allies survive since they're not getting as much healing. For Molas, absolutely nothing is fine. S2 gives you a little bit more counterattack chance, so I didn't bother. And if you really want the S1 damage, you could Mola it, but there's not really that many uses for this unit, so I didn't bother on this account. Next up is Vivian. She uses her S3 CR push EE. For artifacts, Call Ultra is a nice consistent damage option. Some people use Etika Scepter, which I don't really like because of how much variance it has. And if you happen to have a max limit break Spirit's Breath lying around, that's also a really good option. For sets, you probably want to be on speed set. You want her to be pretty fast, but not too fast, because she needs to go after your cleanser. She does need a 100% crit chance. I'm at 93 because I have a crit boosting artifact on my Bernard, so this is an issue, and the rest of the stats into attack and crit damage. 2-piece set can be crit or torrent. For Molas, S3 Mola is nice so that her cooldown goes down and her attack, and she gives everybody attack buff more often. S2 damage, the Molas are actually kind of nice here since we don't have Wukong. Vivian needs to do a lot more of the damage, and later on we're going to be using the device that lets her use her S2 every single turn, so her S2 Molas are pretty recommended if you're using this comp. Now we've got Bellona. You also probably want to Mola her S2 and S3. You can see if you can get away without them first. Since we don't have Wukong, she's going to be doing a lot of the damage as well. At least you want to +4 her S3, so she has a 100% death break chance. For EE, S2 CD decrease so she can S2 every other turn is nice. Since we're going to need a lot of sustain, Bloodstone is recommended. If you're using Ray, you might not need Bloodstone, in which case you could swap her to a damage boosting artifact instead. For her sets, doesn't really matter. Speed set, destruction, both work. You can make her slow, you can make her fast. Don't want to make her too slow, at least be around 190 to 200, and you can go faster and it'd be okay. Crit set or torrent set for the 2-piece. Same thing as Vivian, you want to be at least 100% crit, but I have the crit boosting artifact. Said artifact also boosts effectiveness, so it can be as low as 95, but without it you want to be at least 105 effectiveness. For Bernard, he just wants to move before Vivian, and aside from that his stats don't really matter. HP is nice so he heals more. An immunity set is also ideal, so you can block the venoms at the start of the fight, but if you don't have that, it's not that big of a deal. For artifact, any stat boosting artifact works. You could also use a healing artifact if you really need it. And then for skill enhancements, I just did his S3 cooldown. For devices, row 1 we're still using the AoE damage increase device since we have no warrior. The new device we pick up is the Mage S2 CD decrease device. This allows Vivian to use her S2 every single turn except for when she has S3 up, so she's going to do way more damage and she'll be able to help us remove more tentacles and apply more sever stacks.
금방 끝내드릴게요.
절제된 힘 예방한다. 자, 가자. 피날레를 장식해라. 시전 완료. 의지의 힘을. 이건 어때요? 어디서 감히? 내가 지켜줄게. 시전 완료. 이제야 싸우는 것 같네요.
조심하세요.
후회하실 겁니다. 가볼까요? 금단의 마법이여 모두 파괴하라. 시전 완료.
위험할 텐데.
어디서 감히? 더 버텨주실 수 있죠? 힘의 위대한 박태를 후회하실 겁니다. 자, 조심하세요.
We managed to do just barely over 50%, which means that 2 shots are on the table. Do keep in mind that Armin's counterattacks aren't guaranteed, so you're not always going to be able to do this much damage. Worst case scenario, you just never get a counterattack. Mola's in Bellona, better gear on Bellona or Vivian, or just waiting one more rift level would make it a more consistent 2-tap so long as you land Death Break. Speaking of Death Break, after Bellona landed her first Death Break, she never really had a chance to apply another one after the boss used S3 and the Death Break wore off, which means that so long as you land the first Death Break, this would be about how much damage you would do, and you don't need to land both in the same run. So coming into RC15, Armin doesn't actually benefit that much from this device, because all it does is it decreases the cooldown of your S3 by 1 turn when your knight starts their turn. This device only applies to the knight hero, not your whole team. And the problem is that Armin's S3 isn't very good. If you're struggling with survivability, it could be useful. She'll give everybody a pretty sizable barrier. Aside from that, it doesn't really matter. Depending on what your other knight is, you might benefit from this. I think Mort benefits from this a lot. He'll be able to S3 more often, get an AoE in to remove a tentacle and keep his rage buff up. It'll also give him some healing. Albedo doesn't benefit from this too much. She'll be able to use her S3 more, but you're mainly using it just for the Death Break at the very start. You're usually capped out on debuffs after that. So for Armin, I'm going to opt to not use the device at all, because I'd rather just use my S1 to increase the boss's counter stacks and try to increase debuff duration.
금방 끝내드릴게요.
부름에 응답하라. 아무려. 내가 지켜줄게. 이제야 싸우는 것 같네요. 후회하실 겁니다. 의지의 힘을. 이건 어때요? 시전 완료. 어디서 감히? 피날레를 장식해볼까?
위험할 텐데.
시전 완료. 자, 조심하세요. 금단의 마법이여, 모두 파괴하라. 자, 가자. 후회하실 겁니다.
조심하세요.
어디서 감히? 더 버텨주실 수 있죠? 시전 완료. 힘의 위대한 합체를. 전 지루한 건 싫답니다.
A very slight damage increase from our RC8 run, which is to be expected since all of this damage is coming from the RC levels themselves and we had no usable device on this row. This is still a consistent 2-tap, slightly more damage, but you do need to land your first death break on each run. Other units that you're frontlining with, such as Mort, would be able to benefit from the devices. The Knight CD decrease device would let Mort S3 more often, doing more damage, healing him, and also removing sever stacks or tentacle stacks and applying sever. Somebody like Alencia would be able to use the damage boost device on the left. And Albedo, on the other hand, suffers from the same issues as Armin. Albedo can't proc her S2, and her S3 is not that useful, so she doesn't really have a usable device on this row either. So coming into RC21, we finally get a debuff extension device. This one works so that every single time a ranger uses an AoE attack, it'll extend debuffs by 1 turn. For Bellona, that's her S3, S2, and her full focus S1 proc. One thing about the debuff extension is the tentacles increase Rift's damage. So since we're going to be able to constantly maintain sever stacks, there's not going to be as many tentacles. This means that we can probably drop Bloodstone and swap it out for a damage increase artifact, which should help our chances of one-shotting.
금방 끝내드릴게요.
절제된 힘을 예방한다. 이제야 싸우는 것 같네요. 어디서 감히? 의지의 힘을. 절 재밌게 해주세요. 시전 완료. 후회하실 겁니다. 더 버텨주실 수 있죠?
조심하세요.
자, 가자. 어디서 감히? 가볼까요? 마법이여 모두 파괴하라.
자,
내가 지켜줄게. 시전 완료.
위험할 테니까.
후회하실 겁니다. 피날레를 장식해. 어디서 감히 사단의 방패. 이건 어때요?
So we did actually manage to one-shot, if not just barely. One issue is that Armin's counters are entirely RNG, so you can't really always be counting on them. Worst case scenario, you would just get 0, and you'd want to still be able to one-shot even if that happens. My Armin's S2 isn't molded, so it's a bit less counterattack chance, but it's not that much more of a chance, and it's still unreliable either way. Another thing that isn't molded is the last node of my Bellona's S3, and my entire Bellona S2 isn't molded either, so that would be able to give us a pretty big damage boost. You could also just simply improve the gears on Bellona and Vivian, and that would be able to help you get more damage as well. So this budget comp ended up performing a lot better than I expected. I really wasn't sure if we were going to be able to one-shot at RC21 or not, since we didn't really get any benefit from the Road 3 devices, but we ended up doing it. Not necessarily consistently, because we're still reliant on Death Break RNG and the Armin counters for our damage, but you could improve the gear, Mola Bellona, and you'd probably be able to one-shot as long as you land Death Break.